I don't have my microphone in front of me, which I only do now. Okay, hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike. Thank you. And you're listening to the That Chapter podcast. Yeah, that's kind of it.
Okay, see you next week.
All right, thanks for listening, folks. Nothing really other to say.
No, I do want to hear about. Did you watch that movie yet?
Did you just interrupt me, motherfucker?
It's important.
What's the movie?
That movie we talked about at the weekend, The House October Built or something.
What? Did we talk about this, Keith? We were drinking at the weekend. I don't remember.
We were drinking at the weekend. Yeah, I'm just over it.
Yeah.
But because
I was puking in the shower for folks at home the following morning, very hungover, because I have not used to drinking that much, and I haven't done that in a long time.
Yeah, we started off with like day drinking, and then
it quickly turned into all night drinking.
Yeah, I don't know how we got home.
We had lots of fireball shots.
Yeah,
I remember.
We ended up saying the last orders. It was good. It was good crack.
There's some Jaeger bombs in there.
But yeah, I was telling you about a movie. It was like a found footage movie because I watched a movie that you recommended.
Which one was that?
Hell House LLC.
Oh yeah. That's
LLC,
in Mike's movie reviews, patented.
Really good. I watched it. I was like, that's great. It what was I like?
Great review, Keith. That's
great
why stay in your lane.
Same lane. But then I said I came across another movie which I was going to watch, and you said don't watch it because you're going to watch it and then give a review before I get a chance to watch it. So I've been holding off. I've been waiting for you to watch it.
What's the movie called again?
Damn it, Mike! I've been
what
trying
is
to
it
watch
called? The House That October Built.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called. The House
I've never seen it. 2014. Okay, The House That October Built.
We watched the trailer.
Keith, I was drinking. What do you expect from me, motherfucker? I do not remember. Okay, I think I remember the trailer. It looks good. Hey, listeners, have you seen The House That October Built? 2014, directed by Bobby Rowe. Let us know your thoughts. Listen, you guys can review it yourself. Okay. No, this does sound familiar. Okay, yeah, I guess I'll watch it. I've got about 1,000,001 horror movies to watch. And folks, I'm sorry I have no review for you this week. I've been watching The White Lotus too much.
The White Lotus. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a good show.
Yeah, good, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of...
not a horror show, though.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of Alaskan bush people.
Nice.
Excellent.
I love that shit. I love those survival shows. They're my favorite.
I don't know how survivalist it. Like, I think it's all fake.
Oh, well, you know what I mean. Quote unquote survivalist shows. Like people living out in the woods and shit.
Yeah,
it's great. That's my favorite shit.
It's a good one to watch because then you can look up their lives after. Like, just such like... Apparently they're big like scam artists.
Oh, yeah.
But it's amazing. It's so good.
Yeah. I love those shows. They're the best. Yeah, I've been watching The White Lotus and Hell's Kitchen.
Nice.
Because I am a sad, pathetic person. I literally after when I'm not like researching spooky tales to make videos for or and tell podcasts about, I'm just like I just want to watch something where I can just switch off my brain. So it's man, I'm like turning into my mom. They're watching reality TV, and I usually give out to her for watching this shit.
Sticking on Judge Judy.
Yeah. All right, folks. Okay, so Keith.
Yep.
Real talk.
Okay.
This is the That Chapter podcast.
Yep.
We can't spend a whole episode talking about movies we haven't seen. Any ghost stories for me or for the fans at home?
No, man, no ghost stories.
No, still. You didn't have any last week.
I
None
know.
This week.
It has been quiet in the house, man.
You need to make some noise up there.
I know. Yeah. I did actually. I got a new desk, so I had to put my old desk up into the attic, and my daughter was dying to help me, and she'd been killing herself to get up into the attic for ages. So I had her give me a hand, but there was a point I had to leave her up in the attic for like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, not 2 minutes. It was like 20 seconds. But yeah, she didn't really like it. She got a little scared, which is fair enough. She was like, no, the light was on, but she didn't like it. So I don't think she's going back up there again herself.
Well, now you got that off your back. You know, you don't need to worry about bringing her up anymore.
Right? I know. Yeah.
Keith, are you sure it's your daughter you took down?
Oh, that's good.
Thank you.
That is good.
There you go. enjoy your nightmares tonight, Keith.
I don't want to go home today.
Yeah, too bad. Well, so it's springtime. There's a great stretch in the old day, as they say. Days feel like they're getting longer and longer, which to me makes me excited.
Yep.
Because it means we're one day closer to October.
We're getting
and the
there.
best season of the year. A time when ghost schools and dare I say, actually, tell a little segue into today's episode. There's a grand old stretch in the day. We're getting longer and longer days. Clock's about to go forward, or perhaps it already had, or backwards. Whichever one it does. It does one or the other.
Spring's forward.
Spring forward, fall back.
Yeah.
Well, you know who wouldn't like a grand old stretch in the day is a vampire.
A vampire.
That would make their lives more difficult. And that's today's story, folks. We're talking about Tony Costa, the Cape Cod vampire. A serial killer active on Cape Cod, Massachusetts in the late 1960s. This is a story, I'd kind of read like the brief of it a couple of times and like the Wikipedia, just a short articles and like, oh, this is a story I want to cover or no. Get the gist of it. And it's one I've wanted to cover for quite a long time. And now having properly covered it and looked into it, boy oh boy, this is like one of those ones I sure you probably should have covered a long time ago because this is insane.
It's a doozy.
Yeah, this is a doozy of a story, folks. So settle in for Tony Costa, the Cape Cod vampire. Let's begin with the man himself. Anton Charles Tony Costa was born in the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, right at the arse end of the Second World War, that date being August 2nd, 1944. His father, a Portuguese immigrant and carpenter's mate in the US Navy, was killed at the age of 36, only a couple of months after Tony Costa was born, after hitting his head on coral while saving another sailor from drowning, only to drown himself and die a hero. His mom, Cecilia, then remarried to Joseph Bonaviri when she fell pregnant with Joseph's baby. The child would be born in 1946 and named Vincent. That would be Tony's half-brother. So despite never knowing his father, who had died before his first birthday, when Tony was around 7 years old, he repeatedly told his mother that a man he didn't know kept coming into his bedroom late at night. When she asked him who the man was, Tony pointed to a photograph of his father.
Ooh, spooky.
Or molesty? I don't know. What are there?
There's no middle ground there.
Yeah. So from a young age, Tony had a thing for animals. Not so much the living ones, though. Tony was fascinated by death and even adopted taxidermy as a hobby. It got to a point that Tony would bring home roadkill in order to treat and preserve the remains. But unfortunately for the neighborhood pet population, Tony had one of those little problems. I believe it's an economics problem where demand outstrips supply. The local cats, who all soon started disappearing, thanks to Tony. Now, though he was never caught red-handed, cat-handed, almost everyone knew Tony was responsible for the local cats going missing. You'll no doubt, dear listener, be completely shocked to hear that Tony was far from a people person and never really formed any relationships that had any real depth to them, but he was always known as a very charming guy. Spoiler alert. I've probably spoiler alert in the title, Cape Cod Vampire. He was charming in the way maybe Dracula was, or, in the way a serial killer is charming.
Yeah.
Kind of, what's his face? Who's your man? What's his name? Serial killer, kill loads of people, famous one?
That one other one, yeah.
Yeah, the main guy, the big guy, Ted Bundy.
Oh, Ted Bundy,
Wouldn't think I do serial true crime and shit for a living, would you? He's kind of, that kind of way.
Yeah. His parents were worried about him for a little bit, but they also saw a lot of promise in Tony as well. So putting aside all like the ghostly stuff and the taxidermy, he was a pretty bright kid, and just at 13 they actually let him manage the finances of the stepfather's business.
That sounds very dodgy.
Right. Yeah. I don't know, maybe like they'd hope to keep him, like the busy work would stop him from finding or killing dead cats.
So let's put him in charge of the most important part of the business, the money.
Look, if it stops him from killing cats,
they're really desperate.
He just needs to put his mind somewhere else.
Yeah.
But that didn't work for long, and Tony, I guess he couldn't contain his dark urges.
So Tony Costa's first significant run-in with the law came in November 1961, when Costa, then aged 16, broke into the house of a girl he used to play with in Somerville, Massachusetts. Now, Tony Costa claimed that they had played together a couple of years earlier, and that the girl had consented to being tied up, insisting that the whole thing was completely consensual. Was it though? Fortunately for her, she'd woken up before Tony could commit any violence against her, though it likely earned her a lifetime's worth of nightmares, seeing as she woke to find him standing over her and staring down. She screamed the house down, causing Tony to shit twice and do a legger out the window. Weirdly enough, he didn't learn anything from this near miss, and he returned to the exact same house 3 nights later. So he's like, oh yeah, a couple of years ago, she let me do it. And then he breaks in, she screams, he runs, he's like, I'll try again. So 3 nights later, like, what the shit? This time, Tony tied the girl up and began dragging her down the stairs. It was only her parents' intervention that saved her from whatever horrific plans Tony had for her. And spoiler alert, by the end of this episode, you'll probably have a good idea of what they would have been.
When he was questioned by police about this, so this is what he said. I met her on Thursday, November 16th, 1961, and she gave me a key to her house and told me to come to her bedroom the next night. After I entered the house from the back stairs, I walked up to the bedroom on the second floor and I saw the girl on the bed. I tapped her on the shoulder and she quickly jumped. She told me that she was glad to see me, but I felt that I shouldn't have been there, and so I began to leave. And then she started to scream. I got scared and then I ran out of the house.
I'm the victim here, really.
I'm the victim.
Yeah.
So the Somerville police detective then asked Costa if he had tied up the girl, and he said, "It's a game that we play together. On many occasions I have tied her hands with rope. Then I pull her underpants down and then just look at her. She never hollered before." And this is something that we're going to see again and again, by the way, where Tony, his numbers smart, but he clearly wasn't paying attention in creative writing class because he just could not come up with a believable story to save his life.
He either says he's the victim or just victim blames.
Yeah.
Pretty clear cut case of being a big old bastard man, yeah. So that break-in and assault ultimately landed Costa with 3 years probation and 1 year suspended sentence. Given the gravity of what he did and the implication, folks, behind it, the sentence was definitely getting off lightly. He rightly should have really gone straight to prison. I mean, the fact that he did it like once and then a couple of nights later did it again, I mean, come on.
Oh, come on!
Tony's mother then sent him to live in Provincetown, at the very end of Cape Cod with some relatives.
It was thanks to Tony's mother that he got off so lightly.
Cecilia, yeah.
Like he was meant to go to juvenile detention, and like she pleaded with the judge.
Yeah.
Like, look, he won't do it again. I'll send him away.
Yeah.
Just let him off.
She comes up later again in the story, and she's like constantly like going to bat for him. It's like
she's an enabler.
You need to, you're not being a protective mother. You're being an enabler at this point. Stop. So in what would have usually been seen as a positive step in the right direction, in 1963, aged 18, Costa finally seemed to start settling down. He straightened out. He even got married. One issue with that, though, oh boy. The girl he married, Avis was her name, was only 14 years old. And the reason for the quick marriage was that she was pregnant with his child, indicating their relationship had been sexual for some time before the marriage, likely before she turned 14.
Gross.
Moving on. Over the next 3 years, the unconventional couple would have 3 children together, but the relationship never exactly stable. Over time, Tony became more and more unpredictable, which was exacerbated massively by his increasing drugs use. Like most of the young population, Tony had smoked his fair share of the devil's lettuce, but throughout the course of his marriage, he had begun to indulge in chemicals as well as herbs. His drug abuse now included LSD, hydromorphone, among others. By 1966, the Costa's marriage had become untenable, and the relationship was all but dead in the water. Tony's behavior became more and more unpredictable. One night in June 1966, Tony picked up 2 hippie girls, Bonnie Williams and Diane Federoff, after offering them a ride to Pennsylvania, of all places, which, as you will know, is a fair hella distance from Cape Cod. Obviously, Avis was far from thrilled with her husband bringing home random women, but she was used to this kind of inappropriate and irresponsible stupidity from Tony, and I'm sure her reaction would have been even more extreme had she known that neither of these girls would get to Pennsylvania. Tony would later insist to police that he did in fact drop them off where they wanted to be, but authorities think that it's possible they could have been some of his first victims.
Bonnie and William, so they were planning to head out west to California. Tony, he told his wife that he ditched the 2 girls in Pennsylvania because he was afraid of crossing state lines with a minor. Bonnie, she was only 16 at the time.
So he's afraid of crossing straight lines, but no idea marrying, or like no problem to him to marry.
I don't want to cross lines with a minor because I've got a minor at home. But he later changed that story and he dropped the girls off in a town just outside San Francisco. And detectives they did follow up with it, but they never found any sign of it at all. Yeah, trail just went completely cold.
So eventually, in January of 1968, Tony upped and he abandoned the family altogether, which normally is a pretty big dick move, but he sort of did them all a favor by removing himself from his family's lives. Tony decided it was time to return to his carefree lifestyle, and he headed to California for a little while. He settled in San Francisco, where he found himself a new girlfriend named Barbara Spalding. After a while, though, really, California not really working out for a masshole like Tony, so he decided to return to Massachusetts with Barbara in tow. Only one of them would never arrive. despite the two of them being seen in the car setting off together after Barbara dropped her infant child off with relatives, she vanished somewhere along the journey. Now, Tony always swore she'd left him and gone to Mexico, but, well, really, who knows? After his return from San Francisco, Tony almost exclusively hung out with teenagers, which he's a big fan of that, it seems. He very much really a big fan of that. And Tony, he relied heavily on a small patch of land where he grew his own marijuana. It wasn't exactly a bumper crop, having only 2 female plants, but it was enough to keep him and his hip young friends satisfied, with a few buds left over to sell to the occasional teenager.
Yeah, he had this group of hippie teenagers they'd hang around with him, and they'd just like hang on his every word, and they called him the Sire.
The Sire, man, that's cringe.
I know, isn't it? Well, to be fair, like, their names weren't much better either. So some of his hippie friends, they went by the names Romulus, Speed, Weed, and Fluff.
The 60s, what an awful time.
I think like the name Weed is most unimaginative.
Yeah.
It's like, I like weed.
Dude,
my name's
what, dude?
You know, that's fucking losers.
Yeah. During the summer of 1968, Tony began working at a local doctor's office in Provincetown, cleaning and painting the guttering, when he spotted a young girl working on the reception. Now, Tony decided then, who's she? He asked the doctor. He was told very politely, "That's my daughter, stay the fuck away from her," which, thankfully, he did. He did not, however, stay away from the rest of the doctor's office, and on May 17th, 1968, Tony broke into the doctor's surgery and stole $5,000 worth of pills and medical equipment from the office. It didn't exactly take a brain surgeon to work out who had committed a burglary, and Tony got a quick visit from the police. Now, Tony, again, very nearly did time for the burglary, rightly should have, but once again, as a result of his mother, Cecilia, her pleading on his behalf, really going to bat for him, he got off with a very strong warning. And that's when Tony moved to Truro, just outside of Provincetown proper, and that's where he would really make his name. Between May 24th and May 25th, 1968, which is 1 week after the break-in at the doctor's office, a Sydney Monson, she went missing from her home in Provincetown. Now, she wouldn't officially be reported as a missing person until the following month, and that was also around the same time the Costa's divorce would be made final.
Sydney's sister, she did go searching for her, and they looked for like several days before finally going to her parents and then going to the police. And the police, they assured her father that they would make every effort to find her daughter. But unfortunately, they had no intention of doing that whatsoever. They just assumed that she was, just another runaway.
We'll get right on that. Yeah, right. We'll start looking any second now.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
In early September, Tony began dating yet another young girl, a Susan Perry. Well, they began dating for about a week until the look of Tony. His girls just keep leaving him and going to Mexico. Yet again, she disappeared after a split up. Soon after that, Tony was arrested for driving on a suspended license, but once again didn't do any jail time. Then in November of 1968, one of Tony's other girlfriends, she was found drowned. Her name was Christine Gallant, having overdosed on barbiturates in her own bathtub. Now, there's not really any evidence that Tony had anything to do with it, outside of maybe selling her the drugs. It's nothing like his future MO, but it's still yet another death/disappearance connected to young Tony Costa.
No smoke without fire, man.
No, there is not, Keith. Very well put. Provincetown and Truro, which is kind of a suburb of Provincetown, really, it's long had a reputation as being something of a haven for hippies and alternative folk. In the late 1960s, the American countercultural revolution was still in full swing, and unfortunately cases of young girls suddenly leaving town far from uncommon, much like Sydney Monson. And I mean, when they have names like Speed and Weed, what are you gonna do? Look for a guy named Weed? Come on now.
I know, yeah. But yeah, it really was like it was this transient place, and I guess like that was kind of part of the charm as well, which is why people were so drawn to it. However, this meant that when like concerned family and friends they reported missing loved ones, the police thought they were just another teenager who joined this drug-fueled bandwagon out of town, and they'd turn up sooner or later when the drugs or the money ran out. But as far as the P-Town police or the Provincetown police, they were concerned, they didn't want to waste their time chasing after runaway hippies, because as far as they were concerned, they had much bigger fish to fry. So the drug scene in town had absolutely exploded. So over the course of a year, they made nearly 100 arrests, ranging from heroin possession to glue sniffing. Now, I guess that number, it might seem quite small, but considering that Provincetown was only about 17 square miles and just had 3 full-time police officers, they had their hands full.
Wow. They only had 3 full-time?
Full-time, yeah.
Damn. Provincetown, during the off-season, it's completely dead. 3 full-time officers would be enough. But during the summer, it's crazy.
Right,
with tourism from people coming from all over Massachusetts and New England to spend their summers there on Cape Cod.
That's true, yeah.
It's crazy,
I don't know how many part-time they got in, but
even still, though, it seems
low.
Yeah, it seems like a low number. On Friday, January 24th, 1969, Patricia H. Walsh and Mary Ann Wysocki, both 23 years of age, traveled from their homes in Providence, Rhode Island, to Provincetown, Massachusetts in Patricia's light blue Volkswagen. They booked in at Mrs. Morton's guest house, staying for 2 nights. The girls were introduced to Tony Costa by the owner, because Tony, he himself was also booked into the guest house a day earlier on January 23rd. The next morning, January 25th, all 3 guests were out when Mrs. Morton found a note pinned to the door of the girls' room that read, "Could you give me a ride to Truro early in the morning?" And it was signed Tony. Later, that same day, sometime early in the afternoon, Tony was seen by a friend of his, Zach, driving Patricia's blue Volkswagen. Tony shouted out to Zach, they had a quick chat. Zach had a paycheck for Tony from someone they'd both done some work for, so he took the opportunity, gave it on to Tony. And according to Zach, Patricia and Marianne, they were both in the car with Tony at the time. And Tony then drove off in the direction of Truro. The girls had all been supposed to meet up with a guy named Russell Norton in Provincetown, but they never made it. They never showed up. The following morning, January 26th, Mrs. Morton found another note, having never seen the girls again, and this time the note read, "We are checking out. Thank you for your many kindnesses. Marianne and Pat." The note in the girls' room was written on the same note paper as the one Tony had already left asking for a ride from the girls the day before. Tony was still in the house, and likely if she checked the handwriting, she probably would have found out that was Tony's handwriting. When Mrs. Morton checked the rooms that the girls had been staying in, their possessions were not there, so she believed they just checked out in a hurry. Not looking good for these 2 girls. All right, Tony leaves a note on the door asking for a lift. It seems like they gave him one and were never seen again. It would be a few days later then, on January 29th, Tony had visited a gas station where he asked the owner how much would it cost him to paint a Volkswagen some exotic color.
I haven't been able to figure out the reasoning of why he wanted to paint it an exotic color. I would have assumed you want the car to blend in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a light blue, so you're going to want to change it. But yeah, I'll paint a bright pink.
They're
looking for a Volkswagen, but a blue one. They'll never notice a bright pink one. Hot pink.
It's got to be exotic, okay?
Yeah. Painted in zebra stripes.
I got style.
Yeah, I want tiger strips. And now a quick word from today's sponsor, folks. We are well into 2025, and who knows what's up with the economy these days. Things ain't getting cheaper, that's for sure. My wallet, much like old Keith over here, it's taking a pounding. It has never been a more important time to make sure your finances are in order. It's time to prioritize your financial wellness, and you ain't going to get much more help than with today's sponsor, Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and it helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. You know, how many times have you subscribed to something and then you just totally forgot about it, but it's still charging you every single month? 85% of people out there have at least one paid subscription going unused every month, and I for sure have way more than that. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. To save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/thatchapterpod today. That's rocketmoney.com/thatchapterpod. rocketmoney.com/thatchapterpod. Thank you so much to Rocket Money for sponsoring the That Chapter podcast. Now back to it. By Sunday, February 2nd now, several people had reported seeing the apparently abandoned Volkswagen in a wooded area close to a disused cemetery in Truro. An officer was sent out to check on it, but at this time still unaware of some missing women, didn't follow up after finding the car with a note on the window that said it had broken down, the owner will be right back for it. Tony leaves a lot of notes. He loves a good note. After learning of the conversation with the mechanic about painting the car, the police officer then returned to the area, hoping to find the car still there, but by now, it was gone. Later, that very same day, Sunday, February 2nd, Costa asked two friends to share a ride to Boston with him after telling them that he had a car in Truro for the journey. He added that he had been in Truro and the car was reliable because he'd driven it a week earlier. The friends agreed and the three of them drove to Boston in that light blue Volkswagen. When they asked Tony where did he get the car from, he told them an abbreviated version of the story he would later tell the police. The girls had given him the car before they went to Canada. Switching from Mexico to Canada.
Right.
This time now, he's like, I've already said like about 100 girls have gone to Mexico. Shit.
Let's go north.
Where else exists?
I think he said to his friends that he sold them weed and in return he got the car. I was like 700, or they owed him like 700
Oh
pounds.
yeah, he tells like 3 different stories. Oh, we'll get to it.
Okay.
He tells about 5 different stories about
Right.
what happened to Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wasabi.
Okay.
In Boston, Tony went looking for a place to buy a fake driver's license, registration, and a bill of sale for the light blue Volkswagen. He also tried to sell a .22 pistol to several of his friends. February 7th, Tony Costa rented a parking space and tried to register Patricia's car in his name in Burlington, Vermont, hiding the Rhode Island plates under the rubber car mats. The very next morning, good old Mrs. Morton was cleaning up her guest house, and what did she find? Several of the personal possessions Patricia and Marianne had with them on their trip, she found them in Tony's room in her guest house. By February 8, 1969, authorities finally launched an official search for Patricia and Marianne, beginning in the area where Patricia's light blue Volkswagen had last been seen. Now, naturally, that was all enough for Tony to shoot right up to the top of the suspect list in Patricia and Marianne's disappearance. One of Tony's friends had seen him driving them around in their car. He had been asking around about painting their car. He had been seen in the guest house with them. All signs would lead to Tony.
Yeah.
And while Tony was still in Boston, officers once again returned to Pine Grove Cemetery and repeated their search. This is in the area of where the car had been spotted. Their efforts and persistence were rewarded, but in the worst way possible. Officers found several papers and documents, some scattered around on the ground, others half buried in the snow. The documents, an insurance ID card and various receipts, were all in Patricia Walsh's name.
If you get a chance, you should look up the Pine Grove Cemetery on Google Maps. It's in the middle of nowhere.
I'm Googling it right now, Keith.
So the cemetery, it can only be accessed via a half-mile dirt road, and then it's entirely encircled by woodland. It's just completely isolated.
Oh wow, this is like at the end of it's like whoa, oh my god, wow, This really is in the middle of nowhere, like it's way off the highway. It seems like it's honestly in the most remote part of Cape Cod.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a very remote part of Cape Cod. Wow. All right, yeah, it's a perfect place to do something not very good.
Yeah.
So the discovery of receipts and IDs in Patricia's name was enough to warrant pulling in extra officers and properly combing over the area around where they'd been found. And hidden a short way back in the woods, the officers, led by Trooper Tom Gunnery, came across what looked like a large patch of disturbed earth with a piece of green fabric sticking out through the dirt. Tugging the exposed fabric aside, Gunnery and the other officers realized it was a duffel bag, an empty duffel bag, albeit one with rust-brown stains on the straps. But the distinctive smell of death told them there was more here and to keep digging. The indentation turned out to be exactly what the officers feared, a shallow grave. Underneath the duffel bag, officers began to pull out piece after piece of bone. When Gunnery got hold of a particularly large piece of bone, he tried to pull it free, only to end up holding the bone plus an almost intact human foot on the other end. Eventually, they would take out the complete remains of a young female. The body had not broken down over time, but rather had been cut into 8 pieces prior to being buried. Something that would have required an immense amount of work and not something that needed to be done. Why cut up a body if you're just going to dump it all in the same place? It was done because whoever did it wanted to do it. And it gets worse. Just when gunnery had thought they'd retrieved all of the parts, the officers came to a plastic bag at the very bottom of the hole. Opening it up revealed the head of the victim, though the face was unrecognizable as a person. The victim had been beaten so badly their best friend wouldn't have recognized them. The biggest problem was the state of the remains, though. After all, Patricia and Marianne, they hadn't been missing for that long at all, a little under 2 weeks. This woman had clearly been buried here for some time. So who the hell had they found? An autopsy would identify their remains as belonging to Susan Perry. Susan Perry had been missing for almost 5 months, since Labor Day, September 1968. She was last seen getting into a car driven by Tony Costa. Upon further investigation, officers found she had spent a lot of time with Costa. At the time of her disappearance, Costa had told everyone that she'd gotten heavily into drugs and told him she was going to good old Mexico. Tony had actually done some time in jail the very same month that Susan had gone missing, although it was for completely unrelated to anything that happened to her. Shortly after his arrest for the suspended license charge, he'd been picked up again for failure to support his wife and kids, for which he remained behind bars at the county jail for a little over a month.
I forgot he had kids.
I know, I actually did too. And I was reading into the story for quite a bit, and I've already forgotten Avis and his 3 kids.
I know, right?
So not only was he a serial killer, he was also a deadbeat dad. Though again, probably did them a favor by staying out of their lives, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. The exact location of Susan Perry's murder, it still remains somewhat unclear. However, it's believed that Costa killed her while she was living with him in his apartment in Dedham, just southwest of Boston. So after stabbing her to death, Costa had sex with the corpse before dismembering her, and then he stuffed her body parts into Susan's green duffel bag, placed her head in a plastic bag, and then loaded them into the trunk of his car. Then from there, he drove 2 hours to Pine Grove Cemetery in Truro, where he buried her remains. Horrific stuff.
Dude, yeah. So the autopsy on the remains from the graveyard revealed far more than just who Susan was. It also revealed just what a monster her killer was. I'd say it's something from a horror film, but it's actually worse than that. Susan's pelvic area had been heavily mutilated, her breasts cut off. Several of her internal organs were missing, including her heart and lungs. Her ovaries and uterus had also been completely removed. During the autopsy, the examiner discovered what he thought was a rag or a cloth stuffed in the cavity left behind where the heart was removed. When he removed it, he discovered it was in fact a pair of yellow panties with the word Thursday stitched into them. That's such a disturbing fact that he put her panties where her heart was.
It's horrific.
Damn, that's grim. So the police were obviously very keen to speak with Tony Costa, but thanks to his definitely nothing to do with hearing about the cops looking for the girls he just murdered trip to Boston, they were having a trouble getting hold of him. He knew people may be looking for him, best lay low. That did mean, though, that they were free to check out his room at the good old guest house, Mrs. Morton's, where they would come across several items in his room that Mary Ann's boyfriend later identified as belonging to her, including a hairdryer and a sweater. He stole her hairdryer? Like, what is going? What the shit? And I love that he stole all these things and was like, "Oh, I'm keeping this. I'm actually going to put this back in the guest room."
I'll use that for something.
Yeah, they knew he was their man, a suspect in now 1 murder and 2 disappearances. So in an effort to better get to know who Costa was, and if he was truly capable of such a heinous act, Trooper Gunnery and the Truro Police Department sent officers out to interview anyone who knew him. One thing the police already knew about Tony was his heavy drug use. And the reason they already knew about that was because Tony was a rat. Tony acted as an informant to the local popo on several occasions. Interestingly, that's the least shitty thing about him. Deadbeat dad, statutory rapist, tried to kidnap and abduct a woman out of her own house twice, serial killer, and he was also a rat.
Ratting out all his mates. He ratted out Romulus, Fluff, Weed.
Not Weed!
Not Little Weed.
They never would have got him. Damn. The police quickly learned that Tony was a bit of an odd job man in his small town. Did a little bit of this and that, just a handyman. So almost everybody knew of him. Less savory, though, was his love of taxidermy. Several locals told the detectives about Tony's habit of walking the roads, even the highways, in the late night and early morning hours looking for a roadkill, I guess. Truly, old habits die hard. People would pass him on their way to and from work while he stalked for dead things, or soon-to-be dead things. He also wasn't above reaping his own prey and had carried his childhood homicidal tendencies towards small animals into adulthood. They also found out that despite not having any close friends, Tony was considered to be a bit of a Casanova. Even before the end of his marriage, he would basically often be seen with different women every single week. In amongst all the red flags, there was a bizarre outlier though with Tony. In addition to his occasional carpentry and Mr. Fix-It jobs, Tony also worked as a babysitter for several local kids. Not only did the kids love him and trust him, the parents did too. None of them had a bad word to say about him, apart from maybe he was a bit paranoid at times.
Yeah, he was meant to be a good babysitter, but
that's incredibly creepy.
One of those babies went on to write a book.
Yes.
Yeah, titled The Babysitter, My Summers with a Serial Killer. Liza Roadman is the author, and she wrote about when Costa minded her and her sister when she was 9. Creepily, she describes how Costa took her to his secret garden in the woods of Truro. Turns out that secret garden was the burial grounds for all of his victims. Mm-hmm. But yeah, creepy stuff.
Yeah, very disturbing. He's a very disturbing man.
Yeah, he is.
Damn.
Also, I'm not sure if he was actually that good with the ladies. Like, he did always have girlfriends on the go all the time, but I think they were just young girls who wanted the drugs.
He was, yeah.
I think it was the drugs more than he wanted him.
He was truly one of those guys who was kind of like the loser who hangs out with people who are much younger than him because it makes him feel cool, and they just simply think he's cool because he's older and more sophisticated.
Yeah.
But like people his own age thought he was a loser.
Yeah.
You know that kind of way.
Yeah. Couldn't get friends his own age. Yeah.
So eventually, Tony returned to Provincetown from his self-imposed exile, and strangely, the first thing he did was walk into the police station and ask to speak to the detective on the missing persons case. He wasn't there to hand himself in though, quite the opposite. He wanted to clear his name, and he really shouldn't have. It went very, very, very badly for Tony, which is good. He was far too used to be able to charm and lie his way out of things that he really just kind of threw shit at the wall and hoped something would stick. The police officers weren't, the lonely housewives in a town. His charm wouldn't work on them at all. Obviously, the officers wanted to know what happened to Patricia and Marianne and where they were. First, he tried telling the detectives that Patricia had given him the car, and the girls were going to travel to Canada so one of the girls could get an abortion, then they'd settle in Montreal, start new lives. Tony's story, though, it changed more and more with every retelling. He seemed to not know any of the details, even surface level details. Worse, he appeared to be making it all up on the spot.
Scratch that, I didn't like that.
Even the slightest bit of scrutiny caused massive holes in his story. Like first he would say Patricia had given him the car. Then, actually I just remembered, she sold it to him for $900. A few questions later, he switched it up again. Now the girls had bought weed from him, but they hadn't settled their account, so he'd taken the car as partial payment and was supposed to meet the girls later to get the rest of the money. Tony would then elaborate on this account, provided the cops with a bill of sale that had his and Patricia's signatures on it. But the thing was, no matter what he said, he was contradicting his original claim that he didn't know who they were. Now he was admitting to knowing them for over a year, having dealt drugs to them, and sold/bought/accepted a car from them. Not only that, but he's also now claiming that the girls had arranged with him to use the car for another week before leaving it in a spot by the cemetery for him to collect. Oh yeah, just that cemetery that's miles off the road in the middle of nowhere. That's our collection spot for the car, as you do. So it's insane. Now he knows the girls well enough that they would trust him, but he'd bought it from them, but they'd given it to him. Literally at this point, nothing was ringing true. The officers knew he was lying like a rug. The biggest issue was, though, that they had nothing other than witness reports and a few papers to say, anything was wrong. I mean, they didn't have bodies. He had been seen with them and their items had been found in their room, but there was nothing really more than that. And without the bodies or some sign of serious harm coming to them, they couldn't even prove that there had been a crime. Maybe the girls had gone to Canada. They were eventually forced to let Tony walk free, albeit under constant surveillance. It was obvious by this point that Tony was very, very guilty of something. The detectives just weren't quite sure what. Then a little twist in the tale came a few weeks later. when Tony, guess what? He got a telegram he claimed to have received from the girls. He got this telegram, he says to the police, look at that! It was sent the day before and addressed to Tony Costa himself. The telegram from the girls read, quote, "What happened? Question mark. We waited as planned. Period. Is everything all right? Question mark. We'll meet you as scheduled. New York City. Call Chuck first. Love."
I can just imagine Tony bursting into the police station.
Yeah.
But like, I have evidence that I'm not guilty. Is it another note? No. It's an electronic note.
Yeah, it's a different type of note. Could Tony's rambling, ever-changing story about Canadian abortions actually be true after all? Not long after he received that telegram I just read out, a second one arrived at Tony's mother's home address, good old Cecilia. It was signed Pat and Marianne, and it was handed right over to the police. There you go. They forgot to sign the first one, but they sent me a second one with their signature on it. So there you go. He was like, fuck, I forgot to sign it. So obviously it was pure bullshit. The police immediately could see right through this, that he was just trying to prove they were alive by, as Keith said, another note. But the telegram, it did actually delay the police for a while. It was later found to have been originated from a New York City telephone number that Tony had access to.
I think this is where Tony, he kind of started to panic a little.
Yeah. I mean, I think inventing a fake telegram and then, but look at this, they're alive, look, they sent me this telegram. That's panic move, yeah.
Like, I think he realized that the information that he freely shared with the police about where the girls were going would actually lead him to where he stashed the car in Vermont. So among the many things that Costa said during the questioning, he told the police, "The only thing I know is that the girls told me that they needed money for an abortion. I bought Pat Walsh's Volkswagen for $900. The girls asked me if they could use the car for a few more days and I agreed. They took the car to Vermont instead." So the detective said, "Oh, so the girls are in Vermont now, right?" To which Tony replied, "I think they went to Canada. They were scheduled to meet with a doctor in Montreal so that Pat could have her situation taken care of." So Costa, providing this facts allegedly from the girls in New York, it was an attempt to throw off the police.
Because he had stashed a car in Burlington, Vermont.
He was leading the detectives right to Vermont. Like, that was the next step. If they were going to Montreal, if that's where he said that they were, and they went to Vermont first, they were going to follow the trail.
Yeah, and they'd go to Burlington and might find the Volkswagen, which he had left there.
Exactly,
wow.
yeah. So he's like, oh crap, can't do that.
So, while the investigation remained open and very active, with searches still going on in the woods near the cemetery, Tony living the good life as usual. But after talking to Tony's young friend, because he likes him young, and a weed customer named Marcia, officers were more keen than ever to get Tony into their custody and off the streets. See, Marcia, she had told the police that she'd gone to Tony's secret garden with him one day, and he decided to take a bow and arrow with him to shoot it in the woods. Marcia just went along with it, and the two went into the usual spot near the weed farm, where she helped him feed the plants. When they were done, Marcia, she began to get cold, and so she went back to the car, but she left Tony in the woods to play cowboy and Indians on his own. As she was walking back to the car, though, from Tony's little secret garden, where he took his babysitting kids, apparently, she was suddenly hit in the back of the shoulder by an arrow. Tony, he came rushing out of the tree line and swore, I didn't mean to shoot you with my bow and arrow. And Marcia, she believed him. She thought the damage hadn't been that bad until she got home. She was very badly bruised, and if she hadn't been wearing a heavy coat because it was the middle of winter, the arrow would have gone right through her shoulder with ease. Even then, it was only with her mother's pressing that Marcia agreed to go to the hospital, where the doctors who were tending to her insisted she needed to fill out a police report. Still, in her naivety, Marcia couldn't think a bad thing about charming young Tony Costa, the hippie with the pot farm, so she still, hung out with him.
I find that mad. Like, he shot her with an arrow and she's like,
Nah, these things happen.
Yeah.
On another occasion, a couple of more local girls, they rode to the farm in Tony's car. On the way, one of them found Tony's pistol in the glove box. And that was when Marcia began to realize he may not quite be the peace-loving hippie he made out to be. The attempt on 17-year-old Marcia's life with the bow and arrow, that turned out to be a big mistake. A bigger one than Tony realized. Marcia knew a lot of things about Tony, things he wouldn't have wanted shared. Though it took some encouragement from her mother, Marcia eventually went to the police with her suspicions about Tony, and ended up leading Trooper Tom Gunnery to Tony's garden. Marcia had a lot more to tell Trooper Gunnery about Tony Costa. She was friends with Tony's ex-wife, old Avis, she's laid low through this story, who had confided in her about her husband's seriously worrying sexual preferences. Now, normally, not one to kink shame. You do you. You gotta take care of your own needs. But in a consenting way, of course. Tony, though, wasn't really into any of that sort of thing, and he basically pushed his young, naive wife into fulfilling his fantasies. Remember when they started together, she was likely 13 years of age. His fantasies included dosing Avis with a super strong sedative, usually reserved for surgery, and while she was unconscious, Tony would, do his thing. It seemed, therefore, you can probably guess from that, Tony had a bit of a preference for the less living, and he liked it when his wife played dead. Much like what seems to have happened to poor Susan Perry when they found her body.
God, that's horrifying. That's not a huge leap to necrophilia. What he was doing with his wife,
Yeah, exactly.
Big red flags.
Once the weather cleared and the ground had thawed a little, Trooper Gunnery and his small team were finally able to properly search the patch of land Tony called his garden. The team were scouring the area for any indication of a human presence, alive or dead, when a search dog led them to a dip in the ground. Gunnery scraped away the ice and snow, and under a shallow layer of dirt, he pulled out a brown handbag. The contents of the bag indicated that it had probably belonged to Patricia Walsh. Inside were several ID cards in Patricia's name, including a driver's license, a Rhode Island College student ID card, and a membership card to the Teachers Union. The discovery put the detectives in a good news, bad news situation. Sadly, the handbag being where it was pointed strongly to Patricia not being alive. Its location, though, meant her body was very likely also somewhere nearby. The search continued on, and soon a second handbag was found, also buried in a shallow hole in the tree line. Thanks to several identifying documents and items that included her ID card and her birth certificate, even emergency contact information, that bag very clearly belonged to Mary Ann Wysocki.
That bag probably had the most useful evidence to identify a body.
Yeah, literally had every single thing about her. Who even travels around with their birth certificate? It's usually one of those important documents you kind of want to lock away.
Yeah.
And she's just like...
Yeah, I don't know if she had that. Yeah, I don't know. I've no idea.
It was the 60s.
Yeah.
There was also a receipt for Mary Ann's room at the guest house, further helping to establish the girl's whereabouts just beyond the word of the witnesses. That might not seem important, but in court it would later, make a big difference when the defense would go on to dispute every little fact. It also confirmed that the girls had intended to stay the Friday and Saturday evenings before leaving on the Sunday to return back to Rhode Island. Finally, while searching a little deeper into the woods from Tony's garden, Trooper Gunnery once again made a discovery he would never be able to unsee. After noticing a broken tree with a length of rope tied around it, Gunnery went in for a closer look. The rope strongly resembled other pieces of rope that had been found in Tony's boarding room and Mrs. Morton's. In addition to the rope were several items strewn around the base of the tree. Things that shouldn't have been there, like empty bottles of tablets, a razor blade. Right away, Gunnery knew he'd found the X marking spot and began to dig and clear the ground of snow. As he did, he came across a woman's earring loose in the snow. Gunnery had other officers begin helping him and began the nerve-shredding and back-breaking task of digging through the frozen earth. Around 3 to 4 feet down, Gunnery came across a second piece of jewelry. This time, it was a distinctive ring with a turquoise stone. The ring wasn't loose like the earring had been above. It was still attached to the owner. Joined by a detective, Gunnery continued to try his best to gently excavate the body from the frozen ground. When they came across a clump of hair, the officer tried to pull it free, but the level of decay meant the hair and flesh simply came away in his hand. The men went back to gently scraping away the dirt until they were finally able to lift Mary Ann's severed head from the shallow hole. Piece by piece, they eventually recovered the rest of her remains. While the officers were still finishing up clearing the first makeshift grave, they were alerted that searchers a few hundred feet over had found a second grave. Once they were finished, they carefully covered Mary Ann with a tarp and went over to help with the second finding. Again, piece by piece, the officers removed Patricia Walsh's body. Like Mary Ann, the parts had been stacked on top of each other, though in fewer sections. Under Mary Ann's body were several items of clothing, all covered in blood.
It's mad, like you said earlier on, like there was no need to dismember these bodies. Like it's not like he did it in a way to dispose of them. Like he'd already lured them out to a completely isolated area, and he had as much time as he needed to bury them.
Yeah.
It's like he did it in a way in an attempt to own or possess his victims permanently.
Really, really just over the top. Yeah, absolutely. Just when you'd hoped the horrors would be done, the officers realized there was more to be found. A couple of feet down were the far more decomposed remains of another female. She'd also been cut into pieces, and despite not being recognizable owing to severe decomposition, everyone there strongly suspected it was the remains of Sydney Monson. Ever since she'd gone missing, there had been strong suspicion around Tony Costa, but no evidence and no sign of what happened to her. This had been back in May, way earlier. Remember when she went missing and the police never really bothered to follow up on what happened to her. Costa's own .22 caliber pistol was found buried in the same area. 3 fired shells were also found connected to the gun. So the description I gave you a little bit earlier of the state of Susan Perry's body should give you some idea of what's coming, so brace yourselves, folks. Patricia's body had been bisected at the waist. Her body had been literally cut in half at the midline of the abdomen. Mary Ann's body had been cut into 5 pieces. Her head, the upper portion of her torso, the pelvis, her right and left legs. Patricia's chest had been degloved with the skin peeled off in a fashion like a sweater so that it was only attached by the shoulders. Patricia's cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the back of the neck. She also had several deep stab wounds to the chest, forceful enough to break her ribs, though these were inflicted post-mortem. Mary Ann had also been killed by gunshot, but to the left side of her head. She'd also been shot in the back of the head, which likely wasn't fatal on its own. Mary Ann's buttocks had been slashed and stabbed several times, almost in a frenzy, where other incisions were calmly performed. She'd also been stabbed in the chest and had the skin peeled back from her chest. The pathologist's final note on the autopsies of both women was that the wounds inflicted, as well as other indications, pointed to necrophilia having been committed and very likely the driving force behind the murders.
Jeez, that's absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, really horrifying.
I think like the only mercy is that they seem to have like an actual quick death of the shot, and then everything else kind of came post-mortem.
Yeah.
My God.
19-year-old Sydney Monson's body had to be identified through her fingerprints. There are far fewer details regarding what exactly had been done to her, including the actual cause of death due to decomposition being much more progressed. Like, these bodies were found in the February of 69. She had disappeared in the May of 68, so she had been, hadn't been found for 9 months. Her body had been cut into 5 pieces at her left leg, head, pelvis, and torso, though only 4 were recovered. In addition to her right leg, several of her internal organs were missing. So the officers on Tony's trail knew they needed to track him down as quickly as possible. They heard through friends and acquaintances that Tony had been staying with his half-brother, Vincent. This was back in Boston, so the police headed there. Now, Vincent had taken a new job in the city, and officers went to speak with him at his work. When the police got there, Vincent said hadn't seen his brother for about a week, and last he'd said, Tony told him he was going back to Provincetown. Now, the police already knew Tony was not in Provincetown. Vincent was clearly lying for his brother. But they were like, oh yeah, sure, okay, we'll go back. Maybe we missed him. We'll head back to Provincetown, acted as if they were buying it. Instead, they went to Vincent's new apartment in Boston. And sure enough, as they were pulling up, they could see someone who looked a hell of a lot like Tony Costa peeking out of the windows. They figured Vincent had likely dropped Tony a call that they were out looking for him, and Tony was keeping an eye out in case he needed to do a run. However, when the police went up, knocked on the door, Tony answered the door and said, oh yeah, hey, my name is Vincent. It's like the shittest lie ever. He literally...
I know you.
Yeah, he said, we know who you are. We just spoke to your brother, Vincent. I love it. I'm someone else.
No, wait, it is me. I have a note.
I have a note saying I'm Vincent. Look. They immediately arrested him, took him into custody. So Tony was perp walked in front of the media, who were loving, the flashy killer. This became a media hit at the time, and he still wasn't cooperating in the multiple murder investigations he was now the subject of, but he was basking in the limelight and seemed to enjoy being the center of attention. District Attorney Edmund Dennis was definitely to blame for a lot of the publicity this case would get, and in what was very likely a carefully calculated political move with his career's future in mind. Edmund Dennis gave a press conference in which he gave a hugely embellished account of the way in which the bodies were found and the state of the remains themselves, which was weird. It's already horrifying enough. I don't know why he needed to add to it. But basically what Dennis, he made this up was that there was bite marks on a lot of the bones that could, quote, only have been made by human teeth. And so this then ended up giving Tony Costa the nickname the Cape Cod Vampire. Now, there's no evidence that there was bite marks on the bones. Yeah. He was already chopping them up and a necrophiliac. They had proof of this.
It's not
You don't need, it's already horrifying.
You
don't need to, and he ate them too.
Yeah. He's just super into vampires, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, that's how the Cape Cod Vampire, the Cape Cod Cannibal, that's how we got the name, which still sticks. And it's a pretty cool name.
It is a good name. And he definitely helped spread that legend.
Yeah. So at trial, Tony pleaded not guilty, and his lawyers tried their best to push for Tony to be found insane, having had him analyzed by several experts, one of whom stated on record that Tony was a sexual sadist and borderline schizophrenic with a schizoid personality. Now, while they may have been contributing factors, none of those diagnoses would qualify Tony as legally insane, and therefore he was judged to be capable of recognizing right from wrong. The extent he had gone in order to not be caught, that also went completely against them. I mean, you're not insane if you're the way you tried to hide what you had done. And the final nail in the legal coffin for Vampire Tony was his insistence that he take the stand in his own defense. His defense strongly said, "You don't do this," but he was like, "I'll do it anyway." You'll have heard before that it's usually never a good idea to testify in your own defense. It's usually kind of like last act of desperation, and it doesn't tend to go well for the defendant to testify. And in Tony's case, it didn't end well for him at all. Tony gave an eloquent, articulate speech to the jury, which, he was trying to appear insane, and that did not make him look insane. It made him look completely sane and in charge of what he did. Yeah. He was found guilty.
If you just had got up on top with spiders or something.
Exactly. Just, the son told me to do it. And then, it was weird shit.
He did claim that he had an alter ego named Corey. And Corey was the one that urged him to kill.
Ooh.
And he wrote a book about it as well, about killings. And it's like he brings up Corey quite a bit.
Okay. Well, he should, alter ego, would be a cool name for an alter ego? Weed. Dude, my alter ego's weed. It is making me smoke a lot of weed. Tony Costa was sentenced to life in prison. In prison, Tony was quiet, kept himself to himself, choosing to stay in his cell, alone, and reading books about the occult, which is something we would have in common with him. His crimes didn't exactly endear him to his fellow prisoners anyway, so I think it was probably a good idea he stayed by himself. Though he did make one friend, a very famous one, in fact, Kurt Vonnegut. Breakfast of Champions is one of my favorite books. So, yeah, I'm quite a fan. And he continued to exchange letters with Tony throughout his sentence, and even inspired Tony to write the book you were just talking about. Kurt Vonnegut's daughter, Edith, she'd actually met Tony before he was arrested, and Kurt would later say he believed his daughter could have been a victim of Costa's if he hadn't been caught. So the book Tony wrote, as you were saying, he basically an account of the murders as though Tony was present for them. But he'd just been an observer, while a man named Corey was the one who actually committed the crimes. Corey, his alter ego, committed the crimes. It's a very weird read, and it's basically as close as a confession can basically be, specifically to the killing of Patricia and Mary Ann, though this was all part of an appeal plan. You see, in order to be found not guilty by reason of insanity or some other mental impairment, you have to admit you did the thing you were accused of. So, Tony was admitting he had done it, but it was his alter ego who had done it. So it's like, I did it, but I didn't do it because I'm crazy. He was basically trying to pull a Fight Club.
Right,
Tyler Durden killed them, not me. You know?
Different people.
Totally different people. I'm Edward Norton, Brad Pitt killed him. There you go. 4 years into his sentence, Tony did actually manage, however, to get himself an early release. In a coffin.
Oh, okay.
Which for a vampire is very fitting.
Yeah.
He killed himself. On May 12th, 1974, Tony was found hanged in his cell, having used the leather belt from his prisoner's uniform tied to the bars of the window. He was only 29.
Oh, wow.
He was only 29 years old when he died. 7 years younger than his father was, but far from the hero his father had been. And there you have it. That, my friends, is the story of the Cape Cod vampire. By the way, Tony has been linked to 2 proven for sure in court. 4, we're sure he did.
Yeah.
Because he's been proven for Mary Ann and Patricia.
Yes.
Susan Perry and Sidney Monson, they found the bodies like where he had been. It's for sure he killed them too. Yeah. He's also been linked up to like 16 others.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all those women who went to Mexico or Canada or whatever. When he was in California, there's a number of women he was accompanied with who disappeared. So, and I mean, what he did to the 4 that we know of was pretty gruesome. So it's not shocking at all if a lot more women were victims of the Cape Cod vampire.
Yeah, horrific. So, do you know what's the wildest thing?
What's that, Keith?
So at the end, when he was in prison and he hung himself, he never left the note.
Very nice. I think we gotta leave it there. We just gotta leave it there. All right, folks. Thank you so much for listening to the That Chapter podcast. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to Keith. Check out a brand new episode every single Monday morning, and then on Fridays it will either be a listener story or I'll post the audio of a That Chapter video that I think will make a good podcast episode. Just to keep you there with a little something, a little some extra. So please give him a go. But you know what? Until you hear from me and Keith, which will be next Monday, please take care of each other and yourselves.
And I'll see you.
There you go. All right. Thanks, folks. Bye.
Yeah, I guess.
Do you like taxidermy?
Yes, it's weird. It's
you
cool.
can go to like a course somewhere. I don't know where. It's probably maybe it's in the UK or in the States somewhere where you can go to like a taxidermy course for like a couple months. Like it's like a month or a couple of weeks, and they teach you how to do it.
That's good. No, I like to look. Like there's a museum in Ireland called I think the Dead Museum.
The Natural History Museum, yeah.
Wait, no, yeah, but it's like there's a section of it where it's just like it's all the dead like animals in it, and it's all taxidermied. Do you know?
Yeah, that's the Natural History Museum. The Dead Zoo is
the Dead Zoo.
That's the nickname for it. That's not what it's actually called.
Oh, okay.
This is what people call it.
Oh, I've just always known it as the Dead Zoo. Yeah, but, yeah, it's really cool. It's just loads of like taxidermied animals, and yeah, it's awesome.
That's it. Yeah, it's our folks at home. For any Irish listeners, they'll be very familiar with it. But the Natural History Museum in Dublin is awesome. So natural history museums are usually really, really cool. You know, fossils and animals from around the world. And I mean, in a lot of museums they are taxidermied, but the one in Dublin is especially cool because it's very Victorian. It was built in like the 1800s, so it looks the exact same as that. Like when you walk in there, it does feel like going back in time, because I'm pretty sure a lot of the animals they have taxidermied they did not update for about 150 years, so they look pretty rough. But it does add to the charm.
It does. It's
like it actually is a really nice museum.
I love going there.
I think it's cool. I've gone there many times. It's just cool to walk around. So anybody who is in Dublin or will be visiting Dublin, check out the Dead Zoo. It's pretty cool.
Give it a go.
Give it a go. Tony Costa would have loved it.
He would have loved it.